Welcome back, Night Dwellers. I'm your host, Mothy. Tonight, we continue Carved in Bone. In the shadows of the graveyard, a discovery was made. A bone flute, smooth to the touch, carved with symbols that whispered of curses and lifelong debts. But the truth about the flute is far darker than Reed imagined. What feeds the dead must come from the living. In the shadows outside his window, they're still watching. Listen closely. The story has only begun.
Tune in close, dim the light, simple dark tales late at night.
The vulture wasn't like any bird Reed had ever seen. It was larger than a person, its body hunched and grotesque, feathers peeling away like burned paper. Its wings hung limp, jagged edges torn as though something had fought to keep it in the ground. But it was its eyes, burning and unblinking, that froze Reed to the core. Scavengers circled. Scavengers waited. This one hunted. The first time he'd seen it, perched on the school roof, Tony had laughed. "What's wrong with you? It's just a bird." Reed couldn't explain it. He couldn't tell Tony how the vulture's eyes locked onto his, how they followed him as he walked to the bus, how the pressure in his chest grew each time it appeared. It was like it knew him, like it recognized something in him, and it was hungry. That night, Reed awoke gasping for air. The sound of scraping claws echoed from his window. He sat up, heart hammering, and turned his head slowly. The curtains fluttered faintly, though the window was closed. But beyond the glass, the vulture was there. Its talons scraped against the sill, leaving shallow gouges in the wood. Its glowing red eyes bore into him, unblinking. Reed's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then, as he watched, it moved. The vulture stepped through the window, the glass rippling like water around its decaying form. Its wings dragged across the floor, long and lifeless. The sound a sickening scrape that turned Reed's stomach. It didn't attack, though. It didn't need to. Reed gasped as a sudden pull, like a vacuum deep in his chest, yanked at him. It was faint at first, then sharper, as though his insides were unraveling. The vulture's eyes never left his as it inched closer, every step slow and deliberate. "What do you want?" Reed said, clutching his chest. The pull grew stronger. Tears pricked his eyes as the hollowness spread beneath his ribs. "It's feeding," he realized. The thing didn't want food. It wanted him. "Stop!" he choked. His hand shot out, scrambling against the nightstand. His fingers closed around the bone flute. The carvings burned against his skin, but he wouldn't let go. The vulture froze mid-step, its head tilting unnaturally. A sound like a screeching break escaped its throat, the red in its eyes flickering. Then it slowly backed away. With one final guttural cry, the vulture turned and slithered through the window, its wings dragging behind it. And the second it was gone, the pull stopped. Reed collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, the flute still clutched in his trembling hands. He swore he could feel something missing, something drained, like he was a hollow shell of himself. The next morning, Reed didn't leave his bed. The sunlight hurt his eyes. His skin felt clammy, and he was too weak to move. When his mother knocked on the door, asking if he was sick, he lied. "Yeah, I'm just tired." He wasn't tired. He was empty. The bone flute sat on the nightstand, its carvings darker now, deeper. It was like it had absorbed something. Reed's chest ached just looking at it. Tony called in the afternoon. "Dude, are you alive? You skipped school." Reed's voice was hoarse. "Yeah." "You sound like death. What happened?" Reed hesitated. "Tony, remember what you said about vultures eating dead things?" "Yeah." What if something dead needs to eat something alive?" There was silence on the line. "Reed, man, you're freaking me out. What's going on?" "I don't know," Reed replied, clutching his chest. "But I need to get rid of it." That night, Reed staggered into the garage. His limbs felt heavier than before. Every step an effort. He dragged a hammer from his father's toolbox and placed the flute on the cold concrete floor. The carving seemed to shift under the harsh garage light. Reed swore he could hear a faint melody, like the flute was singing to itself. "This ends here," he said, raising the hammer. The first swing cracked the bone with a sickening snap. The melody cut off, replaced by a low, distorted screech that rattled through the air. Reed hesitated, his breath shaking. He brought the hammer down again. This time, the flute shattered into splinters, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He dropped the hammer, his hands shaking. The garage was silent now. "It's over," he said. But then he heard it. The melody. It was soft at first, curling through the room like smoke. Reed turned slowly, his stomach sinking. The bone flute sat on the workbench, whole again. The carvings glowed faintly. The darkness around it seemed to deepen. "No," Reed said. "No!" A shadow fell over the garage window. He turned, dread coiling in his chest. The vulture was perched on the roof across the street, its red eyes blazing. It spread its wings wide, wider than seemed possible, and let out a cry that rattled the walls, a cry of hunger. Reed stumbled backwards, his vision swimming. The flute pulsed on the workbench, the melody growing louder, the pull in his chest returning, sharper, hungrier. The vulture was no longer watching. It was waiting. "The dead feed on the living," Reed said, the words falling from his lips like an incantation. And now it was starving. That concludes today's episode. Join us next week for another spine-tingling tale here on Simple Dark Stories. If you enjoyed this and would like to help out, please give us 5 stars and let us know what haunts your dreams. Until next time, bye-bye.